community-minded for. See the complete new line of 1970 Fords on display at Herbie's Ford in Alexandria. And remember, nobody beats Herbie's low prices on Fords.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, November 4, and we're in Washington, as you can see by the simple elegance of the White House. Inside our Washington studios, we have today editor Bill Monroe, the Washington editor, and Joe Garagiola. Barbara Walters is here this week also, but she's on assignment right now filming at the White House. We'll hear from that later. We're going to be here all week to bring you the famous personalities and the events and facets of this exciting city. Last night, President Nixon delivered his long-awaited speech on Vietnam, and in this half hour, the Senate Democratic leader, Senator Mike Mansfield, will give his reaction to that speech. David Brinkley will be here to tell us about his Washington in this hour. And at the bottom of this hour, we'll have Aline Saarinen's film report on an event at Washington's Smithsonian Institution. A friend of mine used to say if he ever had occasion to come to Washington, he liked to couch it in terms of, I've been called to Washington. That always makes you sound important. So the Today program has been called to Washington for all this week. We'll start things with the news, but that comes from New York, where Frank Blair is waiting now. Frank?
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everyone. President Nixon last night announced what he called a program for the future, the complete withdrawal of all American combat ground forces in Vietnam on a secret timetable. Mr. Nixon said the only alternative would be immediate withdrawal, and that, he said, would lead to a communist massacre in Vietnam, a worldwide loss of confidence in the American character, and eventually more aggression and more wars. In his television address to the nation, the president indicated he had all but written off hope for the Paris peace talks, but was relying largely on the effort to Vietnamese the war. He said the only thing the communist negotiators had agreed upon was the shape of the peace table. The president disclosed there had been some secret talks and also that he had sent a personal letter to Ho Chi Minh last July urging serious negotiations and got back a reply which, to some readers this morning, sounded almost like a form letter restating the communist line. This morning, Mr. Nixon's critics said they regretted his speech, but the speech had not disclosed new diplomatic initiatives. But his supporters and many moderates said that he had advanced a good explanation of why instant withdrawal was impossible. The president conveyed a clear warning to Hanoi that his secret timetable could be slowed down overnight if the level of enemy battlefront activity is increased.
At the time of the bombing halt, just a year ago, there was some confusion as to whether there was an understanding on the part of the enemy that if we stopped the bombing of North Vietnam, they would stop the shelling of cities in South Vietnam. I want to be sure that there is no misunderstanding on the part of the enemy with regard to our withdrawal program. We have noted the reduced level of infiltration, the reduction of our casualties, and are basing our withdrawal decisions partially on those factors. If the level of infiltration or our casualties increase while we are trying to scale down the fighting, it will be the result of a conscious decision by the enemy. Hanoi could make no greater mistake than to assume that an increase in violence will be to its advantage. If I conclude that increased enemy action jeopardizes our remaining forces in Vietnam, I shall not hesitate to take strong and effective measures to deal with that situation.
Then, appealing for public support for his peace policy, Mr. Nixon said the enemy cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans, he said, can do that.
Let historians not record that when America was the most powerful nation in the world, we passed on the other side of the road and allowed the last hopes for peace and freedom of millions of people to be suffocated by the forces of totalitarianism. And so tonight, to you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. I pledged in my campaign for the presidency to end the war in a way that we could win the peace. I have initiated a plan of action which will enable me to keep that pledge. The more support I can have from the American people, the sooner that pledge can be redeemed. For the more divided we are at home, the less likely the enemy is to negotiate at Paris. Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat. Because let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
South Vietnam's President Thieu this morning expressed total agreement with President Nixon and said South Vietnam wants nothing more than to take over the war as soon as it is able. Here at home on the Today program this morning, Senator Charles Percy said, "No one wants peace more than the President, but he, Percy, would like him to try a total ceasefire." Senator Peter Dominic, appearing with Percy, said that he thought a vast majority of the people would now say, "Let's calm down," as he put it, and give the President a chance. Former Vice President Humphrey, the titular leader of the Democratic Party, said he was sorry Mr. Nixon did not call for a ceasefire. But Robert Griffin, the Republican whip in the Senate, called the speech an act of great courage. Senator George McGovern said it represented what he called the same old tired, discredited policy. Texas Senator John Tower called it a sign to Hanoi that the United States is not going to bug out. George Aiken, the senior Republican in the Senate, said Mr. Nixon disappointed those who expected an overnight miracle. And House Speaker John McCormick said the Nixon plan to disengage was sound, logical, and in our best interest. Senator Mike Mansfield, leader of the Democratic majority in the Senate, will be our guest here on the Today program later in this hour to present his views of the speech. While the president was speaking, the enemy launched 45 rocket and ground attacks in South Vietnam and made infantry assaults on 4 American bases. 4 Americans were killed. But in Saigon, an official American source said the upsurge of enemy activity did not appear to be sufficient to slow the withdrawal program. The president, inviting further enemy restraint last night, disclosed a 20% cutback in American air attacks. Israeli aircraft were reported over Cairo early today, but the Egyptians said the intruders were beaten back by Cairo's air defenses. Elsewhere in the Middle East, Lebanon was generally quiet on the basis of an agreement between Arab commandos and the government to allow the commandos to operate in Lebanon. The Israeli government warned Lebanon that if the commandos made any raids into Israel from Lebanon, Israel would swiftly retaliate. 2 state governors and mayors of about 25 major American cities will be elected today after quiet but rather tense campaigns in which almost every candidate claimed that he was a better law and order man than his opponent. New York's Mayor John Lindsay, currently a man without a major party, sought re-election. The polls gave him a good chance of making it, despite having lost the Republican primary. Virginia and New Jersey have gubernatorial contests, and New Jersey voters also will decide on a referendum to lower the voting age to 18. A final note this morning on the President of the United States. At a critical moment in history, appealing to all the people to support a peace policy which he said reflects the will of the majority. In his television address last night, President Nixon said, "Free America would have no future if the will of a vocal minority were allowed to prevail."
I recognize that some of my fellow citizens disagree with the plan for peace I've chosen. Honest and patriotic Americans have reached different conclusions as to how peace should be achieved. In San Francisco, a few weeks ago, I saw demonstrators carrying signs reading, "Lose in Vietnam, bring the boys home." Well, one of the strengths of our free society is that any American has a right to reach that conclusion and to advocate that point of view. But as President of the United States, I would be untrue to my oath of office if I allowed the policy of this nation to be dictated by the minority who hold that point of view and who try to impose it on the nation by mounting demonstrations in the streets. For almost 200 years, the policy of this nation has been made under our Constitution by those leaders in the Congress and the White House elected by all the people. If a vocal minority, however fervent its cause, prevails over reason and the will of the majority, this nation has no future as a free society.
That's today's top news. It's 10 minutes after the hour. The weather is on the quiet side and shouldn't keep anyone from exercising his privilege of voting. Most of the wet weather today will be in the eastern half of the Midwest on into the Northeast. Light rain will be ending this morning in northern Illinois and Indiana and lasting through the day from Ohio and lower Michigan to West Virginia, western New York, and Pennsylvania. Upper Michigan will have light snow. The Northeast has fog and drizzle this morning with the chance of showers developing this afternoon. Cold air from the Mississippi Valley is moving towards the southeast. Frost and freeze warnings for tonight are out in upper Georgia and Alabama. From the plains and mountain states to the plateau and the southwest, today will be fair and mild. Coastal California will have fog. Coastal Oregon and Washington will have rain. 11 minutes after the hour now. Back to Washington and Hugh Downs.
In 2 minutes, Senator Mike Mansfield, Democratic leader in the Senate, will give his views on President Nixon's Vietnam speech. This is Today on NBC.
Air can be beautiful when it smells fresh and clean. That's why Airwick has developed a better air freshener. Not a liquid, not a spray. It's solid. New Airwick Solid. So good looking you can use it in every room in your home. And so effective, it keeps the air beautiful all day long. New Airwick Solid keeps the air beautiful.
Greasy buildup, burning acids, crusty minerals, the ring makers in your bathroom bowl. Flushing can't wash them away. You need new On Guard, the automatic bowl cleaner. Just hang it in the tank, and every time you flush, On Guard's detergents and enzymes work to keep the ring makers from sticking. On Guard.
What looks like ground roast coffee, sounds like ground roast coffee, smells like ground roast coffee, and tastes like ground roast coffee?
Ground roast coffee, right?
Wrong. Introducing the Fooler, Taster's Choice, the freeze-dried coffee. Good enough to fool you.
Are you sure this isn't ground roast coffee?
Taster's Choice, the new freeze-dried coffee from Nestle. It's got everything ground roast coffee has, except the grounds.
Penny. Not much you can buy with one today. But here's something. Iced Nestea. Costs about a penny a glass. Instant Nestea, 100% tea. Pure tea from a choice blend of the traditional leaves. You get the flavor of the very best tea bags and loose teas without any old-fashioned fuss. Just use tap water, Nestea, and add ice. Look good? It is good. Nestea, 100% instant tea.
Senator Mike Mansfield of Montana is one of the 2 or 3 most important men in the Congress in the field of foreign affairs. He's the Democratic majority leader. He's chairman of the Far Eastern Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He made a report to the president recently at Mr. Nixon's request on a tour of 6 Asian countries. And while he's not been a severe critic of Vietnam policy, he has urged a faster rate of troop withdrawal. And he's here in Washington now with today Washington editor Bill Monroe and myself to talk about the president's speech last night. You've made no public comments about this up to this moment, have you, Senator Mansfield?
No, I have not.
Let's start by asking you, has the president's speech, in your mind, unified the nation behind his policy, or will it result in more and more frequent moratoria and dissenting action?
Well, that's a question that only time will answer, and the answer, I imagine, will be forthcoming very shortly when the reaction to the president's speech is made known. May I say that I would have to agree with the Vice President of South Vietnam, Nguyen Cao Ky, who stated on yesterday that there would be nothing new in the president's remarks, who also went a bit further than the president did by stating that it was his belief that 180,000 American troops would be withdrawn from South Vietnam next year and replaced by South Vietnamese. So maybe we're getting more out of the South Vietnamese vice president's remarks, then we could get out of the president's speech.
Senator, you sound as if you were disappointed in the president's speech.
Well, it was a determined speech. I had hoped that he would offer the people more hope. He laid out his program as he saw it. There are, of course, certain elements within it which have to be read between the lines because he undoubtedly does have a plan. I dare say that he does anticipate there will be further withdrawals, but he does not feel that he could make an announcement to that effect at this time, although nothing stopped Vice President Key from so stating.
Would you like to have seen President Nixon say a few things he didn't say that would have involved an additional commitment to peace or faster troop withdrawal?
Oh, yes, and I have made my views known on that for months, really years. But he has the final responsibility. As Harry Truman says, the buck stops at the president's desk. He has the ultimate responsibility. We have our responsibilities. We may differ, but I certainly hope that he will do all that he can, and I'm sure that he will, to bring this tragedy, which is Vietnam, to a close so that we can withdraw from that area, lock, stock, and barrel, once a settlement has been achieved. But there are many obstacles in the meantime.
The words defeat and humiliation came up in the speech. Why do you think it would be in the mind of the president that it could be construed as defeat if it became national policy to withdraw, even unilaterally? Would the world consider this defeat?
Well, let me put it this way. I would say that a policy of withdrawal has been put into effect, and except for the most extraordinary circumstances, in my opinion, it will be irreversible. We're faced up with a situation which could be described as a win, lose, or draw situation. He has indicated that we are not out to win militarily. He has indicated he is willing to settle for a draw, but Hanoi does not seem to be willing to talk along that line, and he has ruled out defeat. I don't know what you would call a withdrawal, even on the basis of what we're doing, in that category. Of course, the alternative is that we withdraw as the Vietnamese take over more of the war. But it does appear to me that the best we can expect to get out of Vietnam, the very, very best, would be a stalemate, a draw, not even as good as what we've achieved in Korea, where 16 years after that war ended. That war has not ended. As a matter of fact, there's been no peace, only an uneasy truce.
We're going to be back in just a moment with Senator Mansfield. We'll take time out now for 2 minutes to tell you this is Today on NBC.
Inside each contact coal capsule are over 600 dedicated little coal pills, working as a team to fight the Cold War for up to 12 hours.
Eddie's men. You've all probably heard by now there's a fierce head cold out there. Sergeant, our assignment, relief. Steady, men. We will attack continuously all day long. You decongestants, get out there and fight to keep those nasal passages open. Antihistamines, relieve that sneezing and sniffling. Special drying agents. You men, start drying up that runny nose. Remember, men, we can last up to 3 times longer than cold tablets. So go out there and knock down those cold symptoms all day. Dismissed. Sure, I'm tough on them. I'm tough on them because I love them. Sergeant!
All day or all night, Contact gives you up to 12 hours of peace in the Cold War.
Merry Christmas. What'd the old boy give you?
Well, come on, let me show you.
Oh,
I got this robe.
oh, beautiful.
What did you get? What's that?
Hawaii! That's what that is. Nice little package, huh? Ralph! Bill gave Gladys Hawaii!
The whole island?
The whole island! And we're going on United Airlines. Bill charged it with his United credit card. The travel agent got it for us. He arranged hotels, car rentals, everything. You hear that, Ralph? Imagine Bill and I riding down the waves of Waikiki, sipping champagne and luau's. Luau's, Ralph?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll probably be leaving in March, so could you...
Yes, I'll water your plant.
Aloha.
Hawaii. Gladys, leave? No, not till March.
Fly the friendly skies of humanity.
Senator Mansfield, one of the things implicit in the president's speech last evening was an identification, this is not new, but an identification of the South Vietnamese people with the government of South Vietnam. Now, this is one of the elements that the dissenting view constantly questions. The fact that only around 10% of the people actively support that government. Did you feel that there was a stress of that? Was that something that he felt was the general thinking of the American people, that those two were to be equated?
Well, I couldn't answer that question specifically except in this way. It's the only government that we have to hang on to at the present time. When I say we, I mean the President of the United States, the chief executive of this nation. But I do not believe that the two key government is a popular government. I think it's Army-based, Army-controlled, Army-supported. I recall the elections 2 years ago last September in which the neutralists and the Viet Cong were excluded. I do not think it represents the people of South Vietnam, and I would like to see elections held in South Vietnam among all groups, the Cao Dai, the Hoa Hao, the Buddhists, the Catholics, the Animists, the Montagnards, the Viet Cong, the NLF, all of them, so that they could decide among themselves what kind of a government they want, because after all, they are all South Vietnamese, and the South Vietnamese themselves are going to have to decide their own destiny, their own future, their own form of government. And as far as I'm concerned, I think they should have been conducting their own war all along before this. We have spent too much money, which is really immaterial, though important. We have lost 46,000 lives. We've had 260,000 wounded. We've spent over $100 million, and there's $1 billion, and there's no end in sight. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. The only hope is that we do have, thanks to President Nixon's initiative, this withdrawal of 60,000 troops, which I would hope would be speeded up considerably. But there again, I have to bow to his judgment because, I repeat, his is the ultimate responsibility.
Senator, do you feel we should come to the point where we put the South Vietnamese government on a genuine sink-or-swim basis, where they will be required politically and militarily either to gain their country or lose it?
I do.
Do you think we're doing that?
No, I do not. I think we're playing along. We're trying to get the South Vietnamese government to do what we think is best. It's a long, slow, arduous process. I can understand the difficulties which the president has to contend with. He's doing the best he can. But as I say, I wish it could be done speedier.
If the president's views represent a majority view in the United States now, do you think it will even a few months from now? Do you think it will continue to be the thought of middle America or the bulk of Americans?
Well, there's a great malaise among the American people, all groups, all classes, all colors, creeds, and backgrounds. Everything is tied to Vietnam. Our domestic difficulties at home are made more difficult because of Vietnam. We can't face up to the problems which confront us in this nation, which are the most important, in my opinion, because of Vietnam. We've lost prestige and standing among the nations of the world because of Vietnam. Vietnam is a cancer. It's a tragedy. It's eating at the heart of America. It's doing us no good, and the sooner we can come to a responsible solution, which the president is trying to achieve, the better off we'll all be. It is a mistake of the worst sort because Vietnam and Southeast Asia have never been vital to the security of the United States.
Did you feel there was any element of partisanship politically in the president's speech last night? Or do you feel he approached the whole thing on a completely bipartisan basis or nonpartisan basis?
I think he approached it on a nonpartisan basis. He tried to lay out the case to the American people. He took them into his confidence as much as he could in view of the difficulties which confront him. He made a good case for what he had to say, but I don't think it was hopeful, and the American people are looking for hope, and if we're going to get out of this mess, it's going to take some courage, a great deal of courage. Perhaps the president has thought of all these things. I'm sure he has, and maybe in reverse, he's showing a kind of courage in the determination which he expressed in his speech to the people last night. This was a speech to the American people, not to the world nor to the Vietnamese.
Thank you very much, Senator Mansfield. Senator Mike Mansfield of Montana, Senate Democratic leader in the Senate, for being our guest and commenting on President Nixon's speech of last evening. We'll take a station break now.
A stuntman's accident rocks a Hollywood studio in Bracken's World Friday night.
Nothing like a good breakfast. Unless you're not up to enjoying it, because maybe you're having a problem with temporary irregularity. I take care of it the easy, gentle way, with something many doctors have been recommending for over 78 years, caroid and bile salts. If irregularity troubles you, take 2 tablets in the evening, get a good night's sleep, and say goodbye to the problem the next morning. Try caroid and bile salts, the gentle way for regular folks to stay regular.
D.C. School Board returns on Community-Minded 4. Now, Jim Vance with Today in Washington.
Good morning. It's 50 degrees at 8:25. Cloudy and cooler today, a high near 60. District voters take their only shot at participating in a local election today as they go to the polls to fill 5 seats on the school board. The 128 polling places will be open from 8 this morning until 8 tonight. Opponents of the Three Sisters Bridge plan to hold an unofficial referendum outside the voting places, hopefully to get a gauge on public sentiment on that controversial span. Voters in Virginia will also go to the polls today to choose the state's top 3 executives, all 100 seats in the House of Delegates, and a number of local officials. The Senate District Committee yesterday passed out another part of President Nixon's anti-crime proposal with a few changes. Among other things, the committee legislation would make it more difficult for police to use wiretaps and to enter a suspect's premise without first knocking. Attorney General Mitchell over the weekend had criticized Congress for delaying action on the administration's bill. The committee chairman, Joseph Tidings, had this response to that attack.
Postpone our hearings literally for months because of the delay in the Department of Justice coming forward with their proposals. They made a lot of speeches and a lot of messages, but they didn't have anything concrete. Now, I don't think the problem of crime and law enforcement should be political. I don't think Attorney General Mitchell or anyone else should make it that way. Certainly the President isn't. The President is approaching it from the proper fashion. It's bipartisan. It's all of our problems. We have to work together. But certainly today is an indication that we're doing our job. As a matter of fact, I challenge the Attorney General to show me any committee in the last 10 years that has moved with the speed and the expedition and the overall comprehensive scope that we have on the crime legislative proposals which we have received and which, indeed, we've initiated ourselves.
Tidings added that he hopes the House will move as quickly on the bill as did the Senate. The National Capital Housing Authority has asked the Department of Housing and Urban Development for a $3 million loan to meet its next payroll. The authority is seeking the loan in the wake of a rent strike by a reported 1,500 tenants. The authority had scheduled a rent increase effective last Saturday, but a district court judge ruled that the tenants were not properly notified, postponed any increase until at least the beginning of next year. The tenants are refusing to pay anyhow, and the Housing Authority said that they are consequently on the brink of financial collapse. The Washington Caps are the defending champs in the American Basketball Association, but they're not playing like it. They lost to New Orleans 125-115 last night to put themselves in a tie for 3rd place in the Western Division with a 4-6 record. I'll be back after this message.
General Electric Color TV, so sharp and true, it's like being at the movies.
Hi, I'm Andrew McLaglen. I directed these scenes from the new 20th Century Fox production, The Undefeated, starring John Wayne, appearing at your theater soon. Color is my business and has been for years. And I've got to say that General Electric TV Color is comparable to the color you'll see in a motion picture theater. They tell me that GE has done an awful lot of new things to make the color true. And I believe them. Compare it yourself.
And General Electric backs its picture quality with a new written guarantee of satisfaction. If you're not completely satisfied with your GE Color TV and notify your dealer within 30 days, you get your money back.
See 1970 GE Color TV at Auto Home Electronics Incorporated, Woodbridge, Virginia, Sheffield Electronics Incorporated, Fairfax and Annandale, Virginia, 22 friendly Goodyear service stores. There's one near you.
And now we'll look at the weather for Washington and vicinity. It's going to be variably cloudy and cooler today with a high near 60. Mostly cloudy and cooler tonight with a chance of showers, the low near 40. The winds are out of the northwest at 8. Here are the sun and the tides. Chance of rain today, 30%. The present temperature is 50 degrees. The humidity stands at 71%. I'm Jim Vance, and back in a moment to the Today Show.
Join us again tomorrow morning at 7:25 and 8:25 for Today in Washington, a presentation of NBC News.
These blind children are learning to swim. Their instructor is one of the staff of the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. Developing minds need extra instruction, too. These children are practicing reading and writing Braille with a Lighthouse teacher to encourage them. Support the Lighthouse 2021 14th Street Northwest.
You receive courteous service from friendly, qualified salespeople in stores displaying this Union Store card of the Retail Clerks International Association. WRC-TV, Washington's community-minded station.
We're back now at 30 minutes after the hour. It is today. It is Election Day. The polls may be open already where you are, and if you haven't planned to vote today, you might reconsider that. Joe Garagiola is here this morning, our Washington editor Bill Monroe also. And coming up shortly, Eileen Saarina's film report on an element in the Smithsonian Institution that you might not be aware of. Then we'll have David Brinkley with us to talk about his view of Washington. He's come back to Washington. The news is from New York. Frank Blair is there, and we'll start with that. Frank?
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everyone. President Nixon last night announced his policy for the future in Vietnam, a complete withdrawal of all American ground combat troops from Vietnam on a secret timetable, with the South Vietnamese gradually taking over the fighting. He indicated he had all but lost hope for a negotiated settlement. He said the communists in both open and secret negotiations had agreed on nothing more than the shape of the peace table. And he said an instant American withdrawal would mean a communist bloodbath and a worldwide loss of confidence in America's word, leading to more aggression and more wars. Appealing for public support, the president, in his television address, said he had chosen a course which would serve the cause of peace.
It is not the easy way. It is the right way. It is a plan which will end the war and serve the cause of peace, not just in Vietnam, but in the Pacific and in the world. In speaking of the consequences of a precipitate withdrawal, I mentioned that our allies would lose confidence in America. Far more dangerous, we would lose confidence in ourselves. Oh, the immediate reaction would be a sense of relief that our men were coming home. But as we saw the consequences of what we had done, inevitable remorse and divisive recrimination would scar our spirit as a people. We have faced other crises in our history, and we have become stronger by rejecting the easy way out and taking the right way in meeting our challenges. Our greatness as a nation has been our capacity to do what has to be done when we knew our course was right.
Here on the Today program this morning, Mike Mansfield, leader of the Democratic majority in the Senate, said there was nothing new in the president's speech, and he, Mansfield, had wanted the president to offer the people more hope. Also here on Today this morning, Senator Peter Dominick, Colorado Republican, said he thought a vast majority of the American people would now say, let's calm down, as he put it, and give the president a chance. But Senator Charles Percy, Illinois Republican, appearing with Dominick, said he was sorry the president had not ordered a ceasefire, with Americans to shoot only if fired upon. 2 Navy rescue craft this morning sped to a spot off the Carolina coast where a missing tug was feared lying on the bottom, with its crew of 6 trapped inside and perhaps still alive. The tug, the Marjorie McAllister, was last heard from Sunday when it reported taking water. Naval experts said it was a new vessel and could have swamped without letting water into the crew's compartments. Israel reported today that 2 rockets were fired into Israeli territory from southern Lebanon. The attack came a short time after the Lebanese government and Arab guerrilla leaders had reached agreement to end their 2 weeks' warfare by allowing the guerrillas to operate in some parts of Lebanon. Israel warned Lebanon that any attacks from Lebanese territory would be punished. Earlier today, Egypt reported Israeli planes flew over Cairo during the night, but were driven off by the city's air defenses. Briefly, that is the news. Time is 34 after the hour, and here's Hugh.
Now a message from Vicks Sinex. Your nose knows Sinex works better. Watch.
This hidden camera shows head cold sufferers trying a leading nasal spray and Vicks Sinex nasal spray. Their reactions are caused by the difference in Sinex, because Sinex has the added effect of special cooling Vicks vapors.
You can feel it.
Vapors that soothe and cool your stuffy nose. Then an effective decongestant starts working to help clear your head. Try Sinex and feel the difference.
Pucker Power is the power of the hour. Pucker Power means your breath is really clean.
Use Levoris in your Pucker Power Clean. Levoris has a special ingredient that scrubs your breath so fresh, so clean, your mouth actually puckers.
The pucker lasts a minute, but the cleaning power in it lasts for hour after hour. Pucker Power. Use Levoris and your Pucker Power clean.
Frank Blair will now give us a look at the nation's weather.
The weather pattern is now on the quiet side, and the only activity will be light rain in some areas and some 1-inch snowfalls in northern Michigan. The main precipitation area reaches from the eastern half of the Midwest on into the northeastern states. Light rain will be ending this morning from northern Illinois into Indiana and persisting through today from Ohio and lower Michigan to West Virginia and western Pennsylvania to western New York. Lower Michigan will have light snow. 1-inch cover was reported earlier this morning. The northeast has fog and drizzle for this morning with scattered showers due this afternoon. The southeast will be partly cloudy today with a few thunder showers expected in northern and central Florida. Some rather chilly air is headed for the southeast from the Mississippi Valley area, and frost and freeze warnings for tonight are out in northern Alabama and Georgia. From the plain states to the Rockies and the Plateau to the southwest, today will be fair and seasonably mild. Coastal California will have fog, while coastal Oregon and Washington will have rain. A small cooler air mass will be crossing Montana. The high temperature map for this election day shows a cold pool over the Midwest and the Mississippi Valley. Readings will stay in the 30s around the upper lakes and the 40s and 50s southward. 60-degree weather will occur on the Atlantic coast, on through the Gulf states, on up into the plains and the plateau. Warm weather is being squeezed progressively deeper and deeper into the corners of the map. 70s and 80s will be confined to Florida and California, a few 70s for southernmost Texas. Palm Springs, California had the national high reading again yesterday with 88 degrees. However, the shape of things to come is in sight. The national low yesterday was 2 above 0 at Laramie, Wyoming. Time now is 37 after the hour, and here's Joe Garagiola.
Okay, Frank, on videotape, Hugh has a suggestion for better public relations with your pet. Watch.
If your dog has yet to join the happy tribe of Alpo dogs, here's a good way to make it up to him. First, decide to give him Alpo. Then give him the #1 favorite variety in the whole lineup of dogs' favorite Alpo. This is it. Alpo 100% beef and meat byproducts. There's a handsome gesture for you. And Missy, how about that? Trustworthy. Enough to make a dog forget all those dinner times that he didn't get even a sniff of Alpo. Delicious chunks, savory, zesty, loaded with the precious proteins of meat. What a dish and what a treat, especially seeing that your dog is a natural-born meat eater. And Alpo gives him what he loves best of all. One very small warning. The next thing you know, he'll want you to include in his diet all of those 7 great Alpo varieties, especially the newest one of all, and that's this. This is Alpo Meat Trio. This is Alpo Trio. Has beef, chicken parts, and liver all in one can. Dogs love it. I look nervous on that tape. It's because I had the feeling that the dog might be threatening me if I withheld the Alpo from him any longer. We're back in Washington now, and in a moment we'll see Eileen Saranen's film report on the Smithsonian Institution. Station break now.
Eddie Arnold welcomes Judy Carn, the Letterman, and Tom Seaver of the New York Mets tomorrow night.
For years, the grape and the cranberry have been getting mixed up by accident.
Cranberry, grape, cranberry.
Now Ocean Spray has mixed them up on purpose in new Ocean Spray Grapeberry.
Follow Virginia elections with Community-Minded 4.
A huge and fascinating exhibition of work by 258 American artist craftsmen is going to travel all over the United States. It's called Objects USA. The objects were all purchased by the Johnson Wax Company, and after the tour, they'll be given to public museums. The work was selected by Lee Nordness, assisted by Paul Smith of the Museum of Contemporary Crafts. And the show is currently in the National Collection of Fine Arts Building of the Smithsonian here in Washington. And Aline Saranen brings us a film report on this.
Shaggy, askew, suggestive, funny, eccentric, elegant, disturbing. All these objects in clay, glass, metal, wood, fiber are examples of contemporary crafts. They're not what we think of as crafts, the lanyard your child makes at camp, or the pot you learn to throw at the community center crafts class. And except sometimes qualitatively, it's hard to see where most of these differ from the mixed media objects being shown these days in the art galleries as fine art. The whole concept of so-called crafts has changed since the days after World War II, when a new enthusiasm for working in traditional crafts media began to spring up, especially in universities and colleges, and craftsmen like George Nagasaki, who made this, well, I guess you could call it a couch, came into their own. What caused it all? Well, in our highly specialized assembly line world, the pleasures of making something with one's hands and the satisfaction of carrying something oneself all the way from concept to completion seem suddenly very precious. And with so much mass-produced anonymity around us, there was a yearning for objects which were personal and unique and betraying a human touch. So, amateurs and professionals everywhere began making things, mostly useful objects. But today, as the exhibition shows, the primary intention is self-expression, even when there's some functional purpose, and there's not often too much. This, for instance, is a desk by Wendell Castle. I suppose you could sit at it and use it. That is, if you did nothing but sign gilt-edged securities. But obviously, its function in the room is just to be a sort of sculpture, a distant relative of art sculpture. The liquor cabinet is by William Kaiser. It's slightly askew even before those two martinis, indicative of a deliberate anti-symmetry, anti-anonymity that characterizes so many of these objects. Hand weaving has never lost its popularity, but it was given new impetus back in the Bauhaus days and given the importance of wall hanging with people like Annie Albers, to whose work Lily Blumenthal's is obviously related. Now weaving is able to stand on its own feet, woven off the loom as independent three-dimensional structures. This one, made of jute, the material as humble as a mop, the whole a freestanding sculpture by Claire Zeisler. The shaggy textures, free forms, are very popular today with craftsmen in that category called fiber. Not necessary as insulation as Renaissance tapestries were, but wall hangings like them intended to decorate a room with form, color, and texture. This by Sheila Hicks. Modern jewelry seems, on the whole, more interested in calling attention to itself than quietly and elegantly and flatteringly adorning the wearer. Perhaps it's really best displayed by itself as a kind of sculpture. The number of silversmiths is increasing, their workmanship superb, sometimes still in traditional forms, very often with an unexpected asymmetric twist. It was only in 1962 that American craftsmen began to hand blow glass again instead of just molding and pressing it. Harvey Littleton was the pioneer, and now glass blowing is a big thing in most university arts and crafts schools, and it's very beautiful. Capable even of being adapted to pop art expression and rivaling the Tiffany generation with its extraordinary iridescence and delicacy. Kim Newcomb has preserved forever this bit of Americana, hot dogs and potato chips, the paper napkins, a typical 20th century artist's touch. There is work by some of the traditional potters who gave ceramics prominence among modern craftsmen, like the Natzlers in California and Meyer Grotel at Cranbrook. But ceramicists today do more than make pots and casserole dishes and those thick, unappetizing cups. Clay is a material like any other for a sculptural expression. Michel Donna's two tattooed baby dolls are ingenious and intriguing. The anti-slick, anti-well-made, anti-precision look, again, in these clay boxes by Patrick Seiler, as deliberately handmade looking as marble cake and icebox cookies. And there's pop art and tongue-in-cheek art in ceramics, too. Michael Frimpkin's things ain't what they used to be, although the idea is sometimes better than its fulfillment. And so-called funk art in the ceramics, one of the most amusing, ironic, and excellent objects, Robert Arneson's Sink, a totally successful work, a devastating comment on our material, mass-produced, dynamic, obsolescent, commercial world. In the past, when craftsmen were concerned primarily with making beautiful, useful objects, the function of the object made a framework, ground rules, within which the craftsman worked humbly and modestly, often using stylistic motifs developed by painters and sculptors. Within those modest limits, the craftsman could very rarely go wrong. Now, that discipline is gone. Anything goes. Not all the new craftsmen can rise to the new freedom of self-expression, imposing their own coherence and inner unity and form and idea on what they create. Those who do, the few who make idea and feeling and form and material into one thing, have broken the barriers between crafts and art. The show is fascinating. For many years, the Museum of Contemporary Crafts in New York has been giving us glimpses of the new crafts, the vitality and exuberance, and the way in which craftsmen have widened the whole visual vocabulary. But now there are enough objects and enough space really to see what's going on.
Thanks to Eileen Saranen for an unusual look at an unusual show at the Smithsonian here in Washington. The time right now is 13:30 before the hour. We have this message for you. This is about Milliken's amazing Everwear carpet. This is neither sunlight nor mildew can harm it, so you can put Everwear anywhere. Indoors, outdoors, on your terrace or balcony. Watch.
World-famous Milliken research brings you this really different carpet. Feel that deep, rich, luxurious pile of acrylan acrylic fiber, also approved for outdoor use. A special acrylan with colors born and bred in the fiber, so they won't fade in sunlight. Milliken calls it Everwear because it goes everywhere.
Carpet your home with loving care. So many patterns of Everwear in colors soft and colors fair. That's Milliken's great Everwear. Yes, Everwear stays bright and gay. Detergent cleans those spots away. This carpet laughs at rain and sun. So move it out where you have fun. Get Everwear by Milliken. 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 Everwear by
Milliken. A week before we came to Washington to do a week of Today programs, a famous expatriate returned to the city where he first became famous, David Brinkley. He probably is more familiar to millions of Americans than most of the political leaders he reports on each night for NBC television news. And he has just ended a self-imposed exile in New York to come back here. We wanted to talk to him about his Washington. I might as well begin by asking you what brought you back to Washington, David.
Washington.
Washington itself.
Yeah, this is about the nearest thing to a hometown I have, and I didn't really feel right living in New York.
You were there a year?
About a year. And
did being away for a year give you a new perspective on the nation's capital?
Well, that's really why I went. I'd been here so long that the things are becoming excessively familiar and sometimes a little dull. And if you get bored with your work, it shows, you know. And in Washington, there are 3 cycles. There's one annual, one biennial, and one quadrennial.
What kind of the election?
Well, every year you get a budget and a Congress and this and that, and then every 2 years you get a new election for Congress, and then every 4 years you have an election for president. And when you've been here 20 years, as I had, you have seen everything at least 5 times, and in some cases 20 times. So it gets to be a little familiar.
Can you break down New York like that?
No, I don't think New York operates that evenly and regularly.
It doesn't have those cycles.
No, the strikes and so on happen at irregular times. No, it isn't that way.
It's one big fire drill, the way I get it.
Pretty much, yeah. No, I like New York compared to, in many respects, compared to New York, this is Pumpkin Center. But,
The year you were away from here spanned an interesting set of changes, and I just wonder how jarring was it when you came back, the mood changes for Washington with the Nixon administration. And of course, you had followed it. You weren't out of touch with it. But
about the time I left, President Johnson was going on air asking for more time to settle the war in Vietnam, and now I'm back, and President Nixon is on the air asking for more time to settle the war in Vietnam. So
it's not all that different.
Sort of another annual cycle.
How big an effect has Vince Lombardi, and Ted Williams had in this town? Everywhere I go, that's all everybody's talking about.
Well, that's about all there is to talk about here. At the moment, they're our two biggest celebrities.
You mean President Nixon's number 3?
Well, I wouldn't want to rank it in that way, but they are our most, I think they're probably our most admired celebrities. Lombardi, coach of the Redskins, if anyone doesn't know, and Ted Williams, coach of the Washington Senators, both doing fine.
It got so bad last night, a fellow pointed out a window in an apartment. He said, Lombardi is up there right now making game plans for Philadelphia. I'm looking up
well,
at
where was he when he was making the game plans for Baltimore? Where was he?
Unfortunately, he was playing Baltimore.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody's pointing out the windows where cabinet members or
I doubt it.
legislative leaders are making plans.
I don't think so.
What about the State Department, David? Does that remain the same? And it's referred to as Foggy Bottom, and I would like to know
The State Department has remained the same for about 185 years. Dean Acheson, when he was Secretary of State, somebody asked him about running the State Department, and he said, run it. Well, nobody has run the State Department in 180 years. And he's right. It just keeps going on its own momentum. When John Kennedy was president, he had a little meeting in the White House one time, and he was so furious at the State Department at the time. I don't remember all the details now. He was so furious that he was talking almost seriously about setting up another one somewhere else in town and holding it down to 35 people as opposed to, about 18,000, and transacting his foreign policy through that because there weren't so many people there that things get lost.
Let me ask you about this Parkinsonian proliferation of bureaus and so forth, and how much control then people who nominally are in control. What about the office of the president himself? There are people who think that maybe a president doesn't have as much of a hand on things as you might think when you're running for office.
You couldn't be more right. You're allowed to use mild profanity on this program when you're quoting a president of the United States?
You'll get mail.
Well, I'm going to quote a president.
All right.
Okay. When Harry Truman was president, he said, I thought I was president, but when it comes to these bureaucracies, I can't make them do a damn thing. And then President Kennedy said about the same thing, slightly more elegantly. And President Johnson said about the same thing, slightly less elegantly. And that's the way it is. The president can't run it. It's pretty much out of his control.
Well, then that brings us to the Greek tragedy syndrome. You said, I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this, but coming back from Phoenix, somebody said they'd heard you speak out there and said that in your speech you thought it was conceivable that the government could be overthrown by force. Well, if there wasn't more, is that stronger than you said it?
Somewhat, yes. I was saying that through most of human history, the history of the human race is public institutions that don't serve the people, serve themselves instead. Louis XVI and the others tend to get overthrown. People will put up with it for only so long, and then they get angry and get rough. No, I wouldn't predict anything like that, not here.
Now, in a moment, we'll be back with David Brinkley. It's 6 minutes before the hour. We want to take time out for a message for you. If you want to learn how to make super soups, listen to this from Barbara, which she taped.
You know, there are lots of things to do with milk besides drink it. You can eat it. Rib-sticking soups made with milk are lifesavers for quick lunches and suppers. And you can make them dozens of ways, too. They're all nourishing, hot and good, and quick as well. Here's one super soup you'll really go for, beefy tomato. You combine 1 can condensed tomato soup and 2 beef bouillon cubes and 2 cups of milk. Then you serve with an assortment of crackers and cheeses and plenty of cool milk to drink. Now that makes a great Saturday lunch or a Sunday supper. When you mix milk with soup, you're mixing up quite a meal. Hearty enough for the man in the family and tasty as can be for those little folks. A can of soup, bouillon cubes, and milk will give you a big lift because milk is the big lift drink, loaded with many of the good things you need to get you through a busy day. So be sure to get extra milk when you go shopping. The American Dairy Association reminds you, cook often with milk for the big lift that lasts.
Back now with David Brinkley, and we're talking to him about Washington, and that inevitably leads to talking to him about the world, because you can't talk about this city without its influence on the world. One of the things I've been interested in, David, is your views on our own industry. And since the Democratic Convention in Chicago, you've been concerned, along with others, about the role of television in the coverage of events such as demonstrations that might attend conventions and so forth. How do you see the role of television, if it has, and its responsibility, let's say, in this coverage?
Well, its role certainly is quite important, and the responsibility is quite high, because I don't think it's any news to say that the public's view of an event is to some extent affected by how it is seen and how it is heard. We are often accused of being biased. I think everybody in the news business is accused of it. A biased opinion being an opinion you do not agree with. And that's really all it is. People write in and say, you said this, and you're biased. They never write in and said, and I disagree with you, so you're biased. They never write in and said, I agree with you, and you were biased. Yeah. Never had one letter like that. You know, in the old days when one king sent a message to another, the king who got the message, if he didn't like the message, he beheaded the messenger. And to some extent, we play that role now. We tell people and show things they don't want to see. So when they don't want to see them, they tend to get mad at us because we're the immediate object. And it's understandable, and I guess I don't blame them. But, it's particularly in a time like this when there's so much, when the times are so rough and so ugly and so abrasive and so disturbing. We're always putting things on the air that people don't want to see. And I don't blame them. I don't want to see them either.
But that's part of the duty and the responsibility.
I can't really do anything about it.
You have to sit on
way
that.
to handle it, though.
No,
not sure it would not be right.
The alternative is to try to leave out the ugly stuff, and that puts us in some kind of role of grand, exalted censor, saying, well, the people can see this and they can't see that. Well, I can't play any such role as that.
The theoretical goal of objectivity, you made a comment on one time about how it might be impossible to be objective, but you can be fair, I think, if I'm paraphrasing.
Well, I think that's true. It's impossible to be objective unless you're some kind of machine. If you were objective, it would mean you didn't like anything, dislike anything. You'd be against nothing, for nothing. You'd be a vegetable. Yeah. And so it really can't be done. All we can do is try to be fair, and when they get mad at us, hope they'll get over it after a while.
Amen, brother. You said it for all of us.
A pleasure visiting with you, David. We're
thank you.
Happy that you're back here and that you dropped in here at this hour.
We hope you enjoy your visit in our town.
I think we will. We do so far. We're looking forward to the rest of the week, today originating from here. And our guest has been David Brinkley, as I hardly need to tell you. We're going to leave some of you now and be back for some of you in a few seconds. We'll be back for all of you, I hope, tomorrow and the rest of the week from Washington. We'll take a station break now.
The terrifying plight of a woman struggling against alcoholism next on Frankly Female.
See Debbie Reynolds and the Sound of Children, a one-hour musical special, Thursday at 7:30, 6:30 Central Time. Then Bob Hope, Janice Page, John Davidson, and Michelle Lee in a 90-minute